Have you ever felt that there's something wrong with your mix, but just couldn't quite put your finger on it, so you turn to YouTube and come across videos about how this magical plugin will save your mix or boost this magical frequency? Those are things that I've definitely fallen for. But what do you say we put the hype aside for a second and get down to some things that matter most, which I consider your ears, your gear, and your sphere? Hey, I'm EJ, and I've spent the last 20 years in the world of music, running a successful music school, and recently transitioning into the world of audio engineering, where I'm currently recording and mixing local indie artists 7 days a week. Everything I've learned, I've taught myself, just like you can. My learning philosophy brings together my musical experience, my audio engineering experience, and what I've learned through the art of self-improvement. My goal is to help you build habits that help you find success and deeper meaning doing what you love your way. So what do you say we get started? When I first started recording and mixing, I couldn't quite put my finger on what didn't sound right or professional to me. So I turned to the resources I had available to me, YouTube and other popular mixing sites, and I filled notebooks with popular tips and tricks. I mean, shoot, I have 30 different ways to EQ a heavy metal bass drum, but nothing seemed to get me over the hump of what I felt was holding me back. In the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, I feel that he says something really important. He says, we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the levels of our systems. My goal and my intention is to be a phenomenal recording and mixing engineer. But my systems did not support that in any way, shape, or form until I started to realize the most important thing I could do, which was to build sound habits and a good workflow. When we're talking about building good habits, we don't have to make it too complicated. We can start with just a couple basic concepts. The first being carving out daily time. Abraham Lincoln said, if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the saw. The concept of sharpening the saw has been used in a lot of popular self-improvement books, which basically means spend time building your resources, your personal resources. So in this case, we would want to make sure that we are carving out daily time every day to train our ears and to educate ourselves, not to just consistently keep doing the same work in the same fashion as we were the day prior. Next, we would definitely want to focus on being patient. There's a book out called Buying the Dip, and the concept of the dip means that every industry, every profession has this point where the majority of us begin to plateau or even feel like we're regressing. And a lot of times that period in our development is the spot that kind of weeds out a lot of the people that are not as committed as to those individuals who are really intent on succeeding in that field. You can kind of think of the concept of Hell Week with the Navy SEALs, where that particular week is designed to put that group of men and women under such stress to see which ones are truly committed to kind of pushing through and which really do not have the resolve. Every industry has their version of that Hell Week. So for us, the best thing that we can do is be patient and find ways when we are struggling to keep in a positive frame of mind. This last tip was something that worked very well for me. I knew the engineer that I aspired to be, so I put together a slideshow that prior to each day I would sit and watch, and this slideshow consisted of pictures of amazing studios and recording setups. And what it helped me do was set my intention for each working day. I would ask myself, if I was at those studios working on major projects, how would I act? How would I conduct myself? What would be my focus and attention to detail? And looking at that slideshow for a couple minutes before I began my daily work here each day really helped me focus and set that intention of being the best I could in the situation that I was in. If you want to check out my studio slideshow, just check the description below. So as I teased out earlier, I said that the three foundational things that we want to focus on are our ear, our gear, and our sphere. It's kind of silly because it really is ear. Even gear and sphere we can't focus on without our ears. So our ears are our most critical element in terms of growing and developing. For ears specifically right now, we'll talk about developing a keen awareness of frequency. So two of the ear training tools that I really love are Sound Gym and Quiz Tones. Sound Gym you can access via the web. Now, what's great about Sound Gym is you can just sign up and do daily training where they will randomly select some of the games that they have for you to play. But over time, what I've done is I hop over to their gym tab and select some of the games that I feel personally I just need to really dig in on the most. And one of the ones that I do spend a lot of time on is the feedback game, which basically is their frequency detector. I love that game because, again, it covers the whole frequency spectrum. It plays one tone and you are trying to identify which frequency that you were hearing. So with Quiz Tones, I like to play it in pro mode with a pair of headphones. I flip my phone over so that I can't see the choices. Once I hear the tone, I guess what frequency I believe it to be. Then I flip my phone over and select the frequency that was closest to my choice. So what I would suggest for training your ears is spending 5-10 minutes tops a day, but every day for at least 60 days. Carve out the time and protect that time. In the comments below, let me know how your progress is going. And also, if there's other resources out there that you'd like to train your ears, because I'm always on the lookout for something new. When we're talking about gear, I'd love to start with an analogy. Let's think about a contractor or construction worker. And imagine them on the site and they're getting ready to build a wall. And in their toolbox, it doesn't matter if they have the best hammer, the best saw, the best screwdriver, especially if all they need is a tape measure. But that is not actually what's going to make them successful at building that wall. It's going to be their plan, it's going to be their years of experience, and it's going to be their personal technique with using those tools. I am lucky if I can draw straight lines, let alone build anything. So if I go out and get the world's best hammer, it's not going to help me hammer that nail into a wall. Proper technique is. And for me, this was the most misleading thing and the thing that got me further off track than anything else when I first started. As I was watching famous mix engineers mix, I was more obsessed with the plugins that they were using, believing those plugins are what are going to shape my mixes into professional sounding mixes, when really what I needed to be focusing on was their technique and the fact that they were using those particular plugins because they were comfortable with them. They were tools that they knew how to manipulate to get the results they wanted. And that's where we need to begin with our discussion about gear. Here's where I suggest we start with gear. Let's go to the Cambridge University website where we can download any kind of free stems we want from any genre that we're interested in working with. Does not matter. Select the genre that you feel like working with. Download some stems into your DAW of choice. Now, if you're just starting out and feel that you're a true beginner, I would suggest to begin first with nothing but your faders and your pan pots, and work on creating a mix using nothing but stereo field and volume. Now, if you feel a little more advanced and you want to start getting comfortable with using some tools and some plugins, the first thing we want to bring in would be an equalizer, and try and do the entire mix using one specific equalizer of your choice. I tend to favor the FabFilter Pro Q3, but every DAW comes with a stock EQ, or you can, again, select your favorite EQ and do nothing but mix the entire track using just an EQ. Now, if you're feeling like you're ready to take on a more advanced challenge than that, you can mix the entire song, again, using your volume, your pan pots, and a basic channel strip. If you need to create your own channel strip, you can do that really basic with just pulling in an equalizer, a compressor, and maybe something to add some harmonic saturation, like a Soundtoys plugin, decapitator, or a little radiator. Once you get the hang of that and you want to move on to effects, again, I recommend starting with just one stock reverb, maybe one that has a variety of different presets where you can switch between plate, hall, and room, where you can begin to explore the different textures and kind of lusciousness that each reverb presents. If you're feeling like you nailed that, you can then move on to delay, where you can explore the differences between a slap delay and, say, for example, a ping pong delay. But again, the most critical component is making sure that you are using the same plugin the entire time, because what that's going to allow you to do is to explore all the features and capabilities of this particular tool. Last, if you feel like you're spending a lot of money on particular company plugin manufacturers, I would recommend mixing a song using only one company's plugin suite that you own. So for example, I love Cush Audio, so I could mix a session using only Cush Audio plugins. Sound Toys, mix a session using only Sound Toys plugins. Or if you use, for example, the UA Spark, mix a session using only UA Spark plugins. That way you get used to knowing which plugins you can reach for from which manufacturers that get you to your desired goal the fastest.
So what I find really cool about these exercises is, I mean, it's like, hey, everybody, go out there and start working on, you know, your balance and mastering your gear. And it's like, you know, good luck mixing noobs. And then the second I start doing it, I feel like I'm doing this exercise for the first time, even though I've done it, you know, hundreds and hundreds of times. And I think that's the beauty of, you know, this art form that we call audio engineering. I always wonder, you know, is the next mix I do the one where I'm not going to be suffering from imposter syndrome and, you know, constantly beating myself up, you know, prior to getting the validation from, you know, the artists or the clients that I'm working with, you know, making me feel good about stuff. But I feel it's probably the equivalent of vocalists, you know, hating the sound of their own voice. And, you know, we've heard over time that, you know, a lot of famous vocalists, especially John Lennon, really didn't like the sound of their voice. And you know, listening to interviews from a lot of, you know, famous mix engineers, you know, they say the same thing. A lot of them, you know, don't like their mixes or are always beating themselves up until they get that validation. So it's a brotherhood that we all share with this. And with this little snippet that I did download from Cambridge, I think, you know, the big challenge was just the electric guitars and the piano, and then when you're working with just balancing, trying to find some spacing. So in the balance one, I actually had the panning different than I did in the exercises that followed. And what I would encourage you all to do is with each one of these, I basically kind of gave myself roughly 15 minutes to kind of get this going. There's no real point in sitting and laboring over it for days on end or hours on end. What we're trying to do is hear and react. So for the balancing one, I actually had what I'm calling the lead guitar panned right, which is the same side as the piano. And later on, as I started, you know, doing the exercise with just EQ and everything else, I actually flip-flopped those. Really not a lot to go over. It was just some basic things here or there that I hear. At some point, you know, I'll do a video where I go into greater depth on, you know, some multiple cuts in the same area, and why not just like one big cut. I like to think of these as almost kind of graphic EQ kind of little switches right here, so I can have a little bit more control if I want to bring up one of those frequencies a little bit more as I get deeper into the mix process. But it was either kind of adding or cutting something that I was hearing, or if not, let's see here, for example, then just going through and using it more as a filter and just, you know, rolling off some low end to open up space for the instruments that do need to occupy that frequency space. So when you're working with EQ, you know, it's not something that you have to get super complex about or get too much in your head. It's more about just kind of opening up the areas that in each instrument that help get to kind of the fundamental tone of that instrument. So if you're listening to a sound and you feel like you're hearing something that's kind of blocking the heart of what that sound is, working mainly with the equalization section, which is this middle strip, the filters up here in the top left, and then the dynamics, which are right below the filters. I didn't get too much into gating or doing anything with that because as I was moving quick and just trying to make decisions based off what I was hearing, there was nothing that was jumping out at me as, hey dude, you need to start slapping gates. It's pretty kind of self-explanatory as far as working with it. You're just adding on another tool. So if you now had a hammer and you were, you know, building something, you now have a hammer and a saw. and that would be like adding on dynamics. And then if you start adding on saturation, it's like, okay, cool, now we have a set of screwdrivers. But you have to, have a general sense of how to utilize the tools before really getting into everything about like, oh, well, let me use this equalizer as opposed to that one, or this compressor as opposed to that compressor. An exercise like this where you just pull up a track and you're forcing yourself to work with one tool really helps you kind of understand how expansive it can be, but then also if you do feel like you're running into limitations, and that allows you to make more informed choices, especially when your full color palette is back in front of you when you are doing a mix and not kind of working in an exercise fashion like this where you're putting yourself up against, restrictions. I believe it was Serban Gania who said that, he felt one of the biggest issues that us, up-and-coming mix engineers face is that we didn't really have to deal with a world of limitation when starting, especially, if you're coming in the age of the prosumer and, all these amazing, DAW options and interface options and plugins. We weren't in a studio where maybe you only had one LA2A or only a handful of channels to record on, and you had to commit your ideas, commit decisions, and move on. Now we can suffer from, either decision fatigue or paralysis by analysis by having, so many choices and not really ever feeling like we have to firmly commit to something. So exercises like this, when you provide constraints to work in, helps you kind of adopt some of that mindset. And I think that that's a great thing, and actually really a component of this exercise that I should have done a better job, earlier on highlighting, which is, forcing yourself to deal with limitation, which then allows you to become a more creative thinker. And at the end of the day, the more you utilize your creative thinking and your, personal creative decision making, that is what's going to really add your influence and, your coloring to any piece of music that you work on as a recording engineer or a mix engineer. This was my absolute favorite one. Maybe after just hearing this loop on end for about an hour, going through all the other exercises, when I reached the sound toys, which, it's cheating because Sound Toys is just, a whole collection of awesomeness. It's like all the Thanksgiving sides, but in plug-in form. And I just, started having fun blowing stuff up, mainly the kick drum, which I just kind of pumped a ton of low end into, and then just blew it up with the Devil Lock, and then added way more distortion, and you listen to it on its own, and it's kind of fun with the, there you go, kind of matching the Thunder Revive. And then just in like some of the rooms, the snare, I added a little, one of the snares, you see there's 1, 2, 3, there's like 4 or 5 different snare tracks, and I'm not really going to be bothered with trying to figure out what each one was meant to do at this given stage. It was more just kind of listening to the vibe of each and then just kind of creating a general blend. But with this one, it was kind of just extending that out with the Echo Boy, and again, just kind of adding vibe, like the vibe. And then this was just extending with the plate, so it was kind of extending that sound out a little bit.
So, in order to prevent a 3-hour video here, I've tried to keep the information very pointed. But if you do want me to expand upon anything that we're talking about or show any kind of mix concepts using one particular plugin, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. So maybe you've been wondering what the hell is Sphere and what he's talking about when he says ear, gear, and sphere. It kind of sounds like weird or dirty or something. I don't know. But it has nothing to do with anything other than the world of music that you listen to, your sphere, your musical ecosystem. And for me, I realized that if I really wanted to level up my mixing, I need to invest a lot of time into listening to great mixes. So what I'm going to talk about now are the key points that we can use to evaluate mixes. I started off by filling notebooks that I labeled mix evaluations. Every day I would sit down and listen to one song and take detailed notes on that song. So the 6 elements that I think are fundamental to evaluate whenever listening to a mix are balance, which I consider to be the key relationships between instruments, such as the snare drum and the vocal, or the bass, guitar, and the kick drum. Next would be frequency range, the overall frequency range of the song. Is it an overly bright song or a bass-heavy song? The third point would be panorama, which is how wide does the song feel? Does it feel like it's using the entire stereo spectrum, or does it feel like it's coming right down the middle, almost like a mono mix? Next would be the use of effects, or dimension, essentially. How much reverb and delay is used on this track, whether on specific instruments or on vocals? How is it used? After that, dynamics. Does the song seem to be at a consistent volume, dynamic-wise, the entire time? Listening to stuff from, say, the Loudness Wars, where the songs were really crushed and compressed, it felt like from start to finish, the song's dynamic range was pretty contained. So what is the dynamic range of the particular song? And last is vibe. How does the mix engineer or the arrangement keep the song interesting? What kind of ear candy shows up, or interesting things that bubble up at a particular time in the stereo field that hold your interest and kind of renew and rejuvenate the song for you? Now, let me say this. Of these 6 mixing points, there are no right answers. It does not matter. What matters is you sitting down, you listening, and you writing what you hear. If I hear something as bright and you hear it as sharp, it doesn't matter, because when you're mixing, what you need to trust is your decision making, your instincts, and your ability to interpret what it is that you are hearing. And when you're sitting down and spending time each day evaluating a mix and using a template like these 6 points, what it's helping you do is sharpen your ear to the fundamentals that go into creating a good mix, and helping you be able to evaluate those choices and what you're hearing in your own work at any given moment. In my next video, I'm going to be discussing some specific songs and how they relate to each other in regards to these 6 points. However, in the meantime, if you would like a link to what I consider to be my recommended listening and great mixes to start evaluating, check the description below. So let's remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. Is it sexy? No. Is it effective? Hell yeah. And that's building good habits and consistency. So as James Clear said, the price we pay for our good habits is today. The price we pay for our bad habits is tomorrow. So let's get focusing on our ears, our gear, and our sphere. And I'll see you next time.